Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Design Media Arts Lecture Series. We're delighted to have you join us tonight. My name is Peter Lunenfeld. I'm one of the faculty members in DMA, and Natalie Bookchin is our guest tonight. I think I've known Natalie for almost as long as I've lived in LA. Natalie came out very early on and started working with new media, working with databases, working with archives, video, and the photographic. And her videos and installations explore new forms of documentary on subjects ranging from globalization to social isolation to mass connectivity to labor, technology, and other DIY phenomenon, including dance videos. She's currently working on a documentary composed of intersecting video diaries made by people in the U.S. living in poverty, which I believe is funded by the MacArthur Foundation. She's also worked on games, and recently she's been working on large-scale media projects, including most recently Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See, which was installed at LACE in 2012 and was really on, I'd say, my top 3, maybe top 5 things I saw last year. It was a total revelation, and I think she's going to be talking about it. And for those of us in this department who are working with issues of sound and image matrices and how these relate, much less trying to develop ideas about social conscience and social impact, this work was truly extraordinary. In Art in America, this piece was seen as a way of taking seemingly irreconcilable voices and finding the odd commonalities. And the LA Times head critic Christopher Knight said that Natalie explores the grinding friction between mass media and its newly personal counterpart. And I think that's one of the things that I find most interesting about Natalie Bookchin's work right now, which is this way that she's finding a space between contemporary media art and weblogging, video blogging, and all of the DIY media that's out there that's creating these massive archives that one of the things that artists have to do is find their way through to curate. Her work has been exhibited and screened widely at LACMA, at PS1, Mass MoCA, the Walker Art Center, the Pompidou Center, the Whitney Museum, MoCA here in LA, the Tate, and also Creative Time. She's had support from the Guggenheim Foundation, she's had support from the MacArthur Foundation, and her work has been written about. Quite well-known venue for it was in Lev Manovich's seminal book, The Language of New Media, and most recently in 2 new books that are out this spring, The Archive Effect by Jamie Barron from Rutledge, and An Aesthesis of Networks by Anna Munster, which is out from MIT Press. So we're just delighted to have Natalie, who teaches and is formerly the chair of photography and media program at CalArts, join us and come across the hill and freeway. So thank you so much, Natalie.
I'm like, you're all so far away. That is such a nice. That was such a nice introduction, Peter. Thank you so much. I guess when you're old, you can get an introduction like that. It's really, oh, Ido, thank you. It's so nice to be here and to see old friends and lots of new faces. And I'm going to present a bunch of work, and then hopefully we'll have a good conversation about it. Do you want me to? Oh.
Ooh, nice.
Okay.
I think it was just blocking your...
Oh, my face. Okay. So I'm going to spend the first part of tonight talking about a body of work that I have been making since 2008, in which, as Peter mentions, I'm sifting through the artifacts of so-called participatory culture, where people, so many of us have, all of us have devices with cameras in them. And one thing that people are doing these days, every minute of every day, is taking those cameras and pointing it at themselves and telling stories, gesturing, responding to the media, reflecting on circumstances around them, ranting, and performing in front of the camera to nobody in particular and to everybody all at once, and then uploading it on the internet. And what happens is mostly that information, once it's online, it may get seen by somebody, it may get seen by a few people, but most of it ends up sinking into database oblivion, and 1 or 2 videos out of hundreds becomes viral and is seen by millions, and then it sinks to the bottom. And I'm really interested in that gesture and in that desire to turn a camera, turn a screen onto oneself, and to make oneself seen and heard in public. And we're doing it in all these different ways through Twitter and Facebook, but I'm looking in particular at videos that videos in which people are making themselves public. And I have been making multi-channel video installations in which I am kind of assembling, collecting these different fragments of videos and trying to make sense out of, trying to make some kind of order out of some of these the repeated language, the repeated gestures, the tendencies of some of these videos. And kind of giving giving social shape and form to what seems like just a massive amount, a cacophony of disembodied voices. And then I make installations and I kind of return these videos to a physical embodied space, kind of hoping to remind people that that's always, even though it may not feel like it when you're surfing through the net, that's always where they're coming from. They're always coming from a person, an embodied, located person. And so I kind of choreograph these spaces where you can experience or think through some of the ideas and some of the attitudes that seem to be surfacing in this kind of, web of noise and of people making themselves public. Another thing that I'm really interested in some of this material is that in an era of kind of overproduced digitally enhanced images, the work kind of sort of shows traces of the ordinary, of the human. They're clumsy. So you have, let's see. People giving newscasts or presenting stories in front of unmade beds, or someone presenting himself as a newscaster on a wall with a nail where a picture should be hanging. People have makeshift backdrops, and they make videos wedged in the corner of their bathrooms and in their living rooms. People linger in front of the camera sipping on beers, sipping on coffee, taking a drag of cigarettes, and then they upload it and share it with 1 million people. So the first video that I'm going to show you is I keep doing that, sorry about that. The first installation that can I stand over here and not worry about going into the mic? Okay, okay. The video that I made in 2009 called Mass Ornament, in which I choreographed people dancing alone in their room to create a mass dance, and I made an installation out of that. The title comes from an essay by a German theorist who wrote in 1927. His name is Ziegfeld Krakauer. He wrote an essay called The Mass Ornament, where he looked at a popular form of entertainment at the time known as the Tiller Girls, where there were women who would line up in rows and then move in synchronicity. And this was really popular, and he was writing about how he thought that the reason it was popular is that it reflected a new form of production, or a new economic form at the time, mass production, where people would sit in factories also moving in sync to produce something, an abstraction that kind of went beyond what they could individually produce and that they were somehow disconnected from. And he called that abstraction the mass ornament. And this is a still from Busby Berkeley, and you can see how all of the people lined up together, they lose their individuality and they become this form bigger than or outside of themselves. So I wanted to compare what was happening, what had happened, or what he was describing from the 1930s, where people sat in rows in stadiums looking at rows of people moving in sync, to people sitting in front of their screens or standing in front of their screens in formation, looking at people doing the same thing on the screen. And the way that that might describe a new kind of economic condition where people were more sort of working more in isolation, or it wasn't the same kind of crowd formation that was taking place, but there was still this synchronous movement. So that's why I named it Mass Ornament. And I'm gonna, the installation was actually a single video channel where I had multiple frames of video. And then I had sound surrounding you in the room. And I used sound from the Busby Berkeley, from his large tap dancing sequence from his film Gold Diggers of 1927. And I also used some sound from Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, two soundtracks from films from the 30s where people, or around that time, where people were moving in sync for different reasons in the cinema. And then I mixed that in with sound that I added of people, ambient Foley of people sort of making noises in their own room to try to create a sort of differentiation between this mass that I was producing. So I don't show it normally in a theater, but I show it as an installation, so it's a different scale. But I'm going to show it to you anyway. So this is a 7-minute video, and it is here. You don't want to see that. And underneath the videos, you have the, when I archived the videos from social media, from YouTube, I sort of marked out and then included the view count. So that's what you can see underneath each of them.
Thank you. One, two, three, four.
So following mass ornament, I wanted to do something instead of tracking or documenting or representing this flow of movement. I wanted to represent the flow of words and language traveling across the internet, and to look at, instead of people moving, looking at the way that people were speaking online. And I had, this is a montage of of an installation that I had about half a year after Mass Ornament in 2009, and it was at the Broad Space, a very large gallery at LACMA, and I projected a number of, I had a multi-channel projection where on a number of different walls I had different vignettes that were also, like Mass Ornament, produced by putting multiple channels of video in single or in double projections. And the piece was called Testament, and I'm going to show you just one short sample from the series called My Meds, and it's 1 minute and 10 seconds.
So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my medications.
I'm on Depakote 500 milligrams. I'm on Seroquel 50 milligrams once before bedtime.
I'm taking
Risperdal,
Celexa, 40 milligrams of Prozac, and half a milligram of Xanax at night.
I'm in the process of switching medication.
From lithium to carbamazepine,
to duloxetine,
And citalopram.
to Prestige.
And now I only take
Ritalin, Abilify,
Zeldox,
Fluoxetine,
Zoloft,
Lexapro,
Paxil,
Lorazepam,
Trazodone, and Clonopin. And I'm
feeling much better.
So although there were a number of different, not completely related vignettes in the exhibition, I showed you that one following Mass Ornament because they both reveal this incredible tension, I think, between this really intimate and really personal expression and then this hyper-public kind of gesture. And I think that, especially in this one where people are talking about, something that we think of as, it's their psychic it's sort of how they're feeling and what their psychic state is. But then there's so many people who are saying the same thing, and they're saying it so publicly. And in Mass Ornament, too, people are showing you, they're showing you their private spaces, and they're not only showing you that, but it's a weird shift, I think, in the representation of the body on the screen, in that people are doing it as exhibitionists. We're not so much voyeurs as they're wanting to be looked at, and that's why I included the view number underneath, just to kind of remind you that so many people are looking at these videos, and that in a way, when you're posting your stuff, not in a way, but when you post your stuff online or on social media, you're rewarded for popularity. And you're rewarded because your video rises up, and you're rewarded even monetarily if you do really well. So there's this sort of push that people have to be public, but then to further isolate themselves at the same time in their private spaces in front of their screens. And so I am looking for that tension between this, and how that reflects what we're living through right now, between this hyper-public and then this hyper-private at the same time. So I'm going to now talk a little bit about what I did following the installation at LACMA that I just showed you a vignette from. And it's a project that Peter mentioned. Oh, one thing to say, triggered by the PowerPoint. I show my work, as I said before, in gallery spaces or in museums as a way to kind of, or with the hope that people will be able to contemplate on or think about the kinds of things that are harder to think about when you watch it online, like by taking it out of that space and bringing it into another environment where you can pay attention differently. But I always put my work back online, where because all of the material is found, it's all found online, and so I post my videos back on YouTube. This Mass Ornament I posted on YouTube, and they removed the sound. for copyright reasons. So I posted it and I changed the name to Me Dancing, which was the name of a lot of the videos that I had appropriated. And I put it back on Vimeo so that it can, sort of recirculate in that space in which I first found it. And lots of people look at these videos online. And with some of the videos, when it's not like this and there's a million people in the video, but in some of the videos where it's a little less sort of, the scale is a little smaller, I will post response videos on YouTube to the people that have been included in it, just so that they know that they're, that it is a response to their work. So I've gotten some interesting, only a little, but some interesting responses from people who are in my videos. In 2012, I completed a piece called Now He's Out in Public and Everyone Can See, which is a title that's taken from some things that people say in the video. It is an 18-channel installation in which I guess the best way to explain it is that in the previous work, I had projections of multiple channels on a wall, and people would view the work by standing en masse in front of the wall, looking at people en masse looking back at them. In this one, I wanted to kind of speak more about the individuality of that the screens were all separate and that people are looking individually at screens, even though there's a connection between them. And I also wanted to activate the space in a different way. And so it's a very hard project to document, but I basically exploded my videos into three-dimensional space. And so what you have is a room that has monitors hanging by fine cables from different heights and different distances around the room. And I made a 16-minute narrative that unfolds across the space. It kind of, it appears in different parts across the space. Sometimes, like in the last work, people will speak all at once. Other times there are solo narrations or monologues. And as a viewer, you enter a space that's semi-dark, and you need to continuously shift your body and shift your gaze to follow this narrative that's unfolding. The story is a blend of a number of different scandals, media scandals, that video diarists or vloggers retell or reenact or interpret involving very famous African-American public figures. And as you enter the space and you follow the narrative, they're so common and they're so familiar that you will recognize, you think you recognize as you're listening to the story, you think you recognize who is being talked about. You're like, oh, okay, I know what it's about. And then as you recognize it, it shifts and it becomes about someone else. And so just as your body is turning to try to catch an image, so too the kind of the narrative, you're shifting in terms of thinking you recognize and then misrecognizing the story. And it's the piece, the scandals that I was collecting, sort of came, I would say you could describe them as scandals that were produced in the age of Obama, which is an age in which we were promised, right, and a lot of people believed that we were at the end, that race was over, now that we had an African-American president, but in fact, what happened instead is that all of this kind of racial tension that was bubbling beneath the surface sort of erupted, and nowhere was it more, I would say, pointed and heated and disturbing than on the internet. And so the piece sort of addresses and looks at these different, and I call it a documentary because all of my work is using the documents that are online, and instead of directly documenting the world, I'm documenting how people document, how people describe the world around them, how people make meaning out of what's happening around them. And so it's a kind of document of the Obama era and the way that race is talked about online. And I'm gonna, I will show you two short clips from this longer narrative. And it's, they're kind of facsimiles of the installation I've montaged together. I had a cinematographer shoot the installation, and then I montaged together different layers to try to produce something of what you would experience in the space. But the kind of paradox of the experience of the piece is that although it's all taken from online material, you really have to be there. And so it kind of reminds you that the body matters, which is what, in a sense, the piece is also about. That you have to, like the body and location and time and presence matter. So, anyway, with that in mind, I'm gonna, the first sample that I'm gonna show you is right at the beginning of the narrative. You'll recognize who they're talking about, although it does shift, but it's mostly focusing on one man in particular at this point.
I have the feeling that this could have turned out differently had things not progressed the way that they had. But before we jump to conclusions, we need to make sure we have all the facts.
Regarding the situation.
Let's just look at the facts.
This dude, who also happens to be a black man,
he's no blacker than I am, really. I mean, if you look past skin tone.
I don't know what race you are.
No one knows the first thing about him.
Even his name is a mystery.
you gotta show your ID.
Please state your full name and place of birth.
Why won't he produce his actual birth certificate?
What is the problem with that?
Here's my birth certificate.
He may or may not be born in America.
Where is yours?
He doesn't know if he's black or white.
I don't see any proof.
There are a lot of questions.
He's just as much white as black.
He needs to be black.
As to whether he is or he isn't.
What a joke.
He needs to understand the language of the streets.
Like,
This makes me ask,
he is a mask.
what
Is he a fraud?
what type of black
According
man
to him, he's more than
says that he is 56% white and he's supposed to be a friend
He's
of
not
him?
black.
50% of your blood is black and 50% is white.
So he's more of a white guy, and he even said so himself.
He never ever
You don't consider
intended on embracing us.
This guy's one of us. I haven't seen any evidence.
We have no proof.
Do we know who this man is?
I don't know who that motherfucker is.
Nah.
Do we know what he does?
What's he got to hide? What is he trying to hide?
Break it down, bro.
Yo,
Don't lie to me, boy.
I always thought he was black.
So the next excerpt is 3 minutes, and it's from somewhere in the middle of the narrative.
I really can't think of too many of our black famous people who have not gotten caught up in some type of scandal or conspiracy.
I would really hate
or
to see any type of assassination attempt,
some type of
any type of
violent
violence
act or
against society.
something.
Who's gonna kill the black man?
Show some respect to the man. Aside all the crazy media stuff, all the tabloids. I mean, he has problems. Yeah,
He makes mistakes.
He
He's
doesn't
rich.
have problems.
What would you do if he was rich?
It's just really sad, you know.
If you were rich?
I guess when you got that much money, the more money you have, you just gotta go and fuck shit up. Like the more problems you have.
I'm sure if you
He's
were
always been under the
in the
spotlight.
spotlight since you were 6 years old, abusive parents, like all types of shit going on, cameras in your face,
all these people that
Put him on a pedestal.
On a big ass pedestal.
Put these motherfuckers on a pedestal.
And expect them to perform at this high level and live at this high level.
to a higher than
Hold these guys to a higher standard.
But we don't want to see any impurity in this facade.
You were, a guy that a lot of people look up to, including kids.
You know, a lot of kids look at minorities or even white kids or whatever. I'm not going to make race an issue.
You were accepted by the white kids.
He's gonna give us all these stupid views, and he's gonna mold our minds so that we think just like him.
What do you think 8-year-old boys and girls are, asking their parents when they're seeing you in the supermarket tabloids?
And then when we grow up, will be like, oh,
He's a pedophile.
He's a kid at heart, and he loves children.
He's a socialist, and he's going to be indoctrinating their children. Oh no!
Yo, this guy's like a fucking god.
I want to be just like him.
This guy,
Everywhere
chicks
around the
and
world
guys were
loves him.
fainting
Loves him.
at his presence.
Oh, what an icon.
He's a hero.
Mr. Perfection.
Savior's coming.
The greatest thing that has ever been.
He's going to save the world.
the second coming.
They bow down to him. They
He's
worship.
wonderful. He can do no wrong.
He's the Messiah. He's gonna
And-
save us all.
It disturbs me.
No, he's not.
Not that I didn't vote for the man.
I've said
He
this
has feet of
from the
clay.
beginning.
But
He is no God.
Always looking for a Messiah.
He's not Jesus, not Buddha, he's not Muhammad, he's nothing but a man.
He's not the Almighty.
No, he's not the Messiah. He's a human being.
Just like you and I.
He is human.
We didn't get to have a childhood, and humans make mistakes.
They make mistakes.
He's just a normal dude.
Nobody's perfect. They have sin
So why in the heck should we judge him?
in their
He's a
lives.
person like everybody else.
What makes him exempt from being human?
Then that brings me to the other thing. Everybody's all upset.
Because he is.
Because he's black.
There, I said it.
So the reason it's, some of it's out of focus is, as the cinematographer was shooting, she was pulling focus just to try to give some sense of the depth in the space. But I think it can also be a little confusing if you, because that's not, this is just a document of the piece. So I have a little bit of time, and I thought that I might just talk a little bit about the project that I'm working on now. It's really, really different than this work, and it's very much in progress. But because this is a room full of students, mostly, I think it can be helpful to kind of watch somebody as they haven't worked something out, just talk about some, like, transitioning from one kind of project to another. So I'll try it, and then we can have a little bit of time left for conversation. So the project that I'm working on now, I thought it had a title when I was kind of coming up with the idea, but I don't like the title anymore, so it doesn't have a title anymore. The original working title was called Long Story Short. And, okay. And the project, let me see, is there anything there you shouldn't see? No, okay. So when I had the show at LACMA with, that was the one with My Meds, somebody who is sort of the communication director of a large poverty-fighting organization in the Bay Area saw the show and asked me if I would make an advocacy film for their annual fundraiser. And I have always made art for art as opposed to art for, you know, a purpose, or art for, you know, sort of a commercial or some other kind of end, but I thought that I would do it just because it seemed like a really good challenge and because I thought it was a good cause. And I decided to make a film using a similar form of collective storytelling where lots of people were kind of telling their story and then I would blend it together. And in order to do that, I kind of told them what kind of video I was looking for. I had people kind of think through some of the questions and then make their own video diaries, and then I organized the stories together and made this film, 4-minute film, that was shown at this big fundraiser, and they made, not because of the film, but they made $6 million. It was like a kind of, you know, sort of this big poverty-fighting organization event. And after I made that, I was kind of blown away by the stories because I had spent 2 years working on this last project, which started, I mean, the story of this last project is that originally I wanted to make a video about the Tiger Woods scandal because I don't know if you remember, but a couple of years ago, Tiger Woods was in a car accident because his wife at the time, he's African American. He doesn't identify as black, but he identifies as a name he made up called Cannibal Asian, which is Caucasian and black and Asian, which angered some people in the black community. And then he was married to this blonde model who then beat him up. And then he was considered not black or he was considered not black and then he went to being black. I mean, there was all this weird, interesting stuff about identity and race and who could identify as what that came up in this story that was reperformed over and over again on YouTube, where people would make videos acting as one person or acting as another person and retelling the story. And I thought, oh, there's something that I should look at. And so as I was collecting videos of the scandal, as people were telling their stories, they kept on slipping, and instead of talking about Obama, they would start, Obama, I just did it myself. Instead of talking about Tiger Woods, they would start talking about Obama, or they would talk about Henry Louis Gates, who had recently gotten arrested outside of his home for trying to get into his home because he'd lost his keys. Like all of these people started slipping. And I decided I wanted to make a project about that slip, about that it was not about those men at all, but it was about something else. And that was, I don't know how I just backtracked and talked about the last project, but anyway, so it was a really intense and difficult project to work on because I was dealing with some material that was kind of hard to watch. And so doing this project where people who don't normally tell their stories online, people that are just not visible, people living in poverty, was really refreshing. And I loved it. And I loved the stories I was hearing. And I thought I wanted to do something more with that. I wanted to do something that wasn't made for a specific purpose, but was made as an artist might make something with a lot of questions rather than an answer that you have to provide when you're doing something for a fundraiser. So I applied for a big grant. I got it, and now I'm making the project. And what I'm trying to do is to use a similar form, which is to gather an archive of stories, of a large archive of stories that people are making, talking to a camera, and then look for patterns and look for narrative tropes and look for repeated phrases and build a film out of that. And I've done it for shorter amounts of time in these vignettes, but I don't know what it'll be like to make a longer film in that way. But what I've been doing so far is I have over 200 stories that I've collected, and I've started to kind of piece them together and create a series of vignettes. I'm going to show you, I don't know, maybe I'll show you 5 or 10 minutes of it. It's really dark and it's really intense. And there's no reprieve in a way. It's just sort of like, but the reason I'm showing, and so it's not in all finished, but I want to show it just to show you the difference in the kind of stories or the quality of stories that I'm getting. And maybe there's something of a difference when someone else is in a room. When you talk to yourself, by yourself in front of a screen, as you're all doing, half of you are doing now anyway, texting or whatever you're doing in front of your screen, it's a really, there's a real kind of flat, there's a certain kind of communication. And when you think of or you know a bigger context in which you're actually, even if you're talking to yourself, if there's a bigger context, something else can happen. And so I'll just show you, and then we'll have a little bit of time to talk. But there's no sound mix on this. The edit's really rough, but it's just to give you a sense of some of the stories I've been collecting.
Like when you get under pressure, it's like you come to a fork in the road when you're poor and you're living in poverty, and it's like it feels like you're backed in the corner and you have no other choice or no other options when you don't have any money.
My experience in not having money,
when people have too little
it causes
money,
people to do things that they wouldn't
have to do things
normally
that you would
do.
never think you would have to do as far as degrading your own stuff.
So you just have to, do things that you never thought you would do. Things that you never thought that you would do. You have to do so that your kids could go to school every day and not be hungry and be okay, because they're going through something anyway, because that's a situation that you're going through. Things like, for an example,
and having a panic, ask people for money,
food.
I never thought that I would have to panhandle.
It is really degrading.
But I
and
to feed my children, to put gas in the car, to get them to school,
embarrassing.
to buy them shoes.
Definitely took a toll on my ego. And that in turn kind of made me give up on myself as far as getting off the streets. At least at times. You know, it felt almost impossible.
A lot of people I know, including myself, is like
I can't ask people for stuff.
It's like they too proud to beg.
I'm not the type of person that can stand on the side of the freeway.
Say,
I
can
can't
I borrow
ask people
some
for money.
or,
I can't beg people for money. I don't do that.
Even if you borrow it,
if I don't
it's
have
not really
it,
borrowing
then I
it
just kind of do without.
because you don't have the money to pay it back. It's like you don't have the money from the start.
I went and stood on a corner, and I wrote a sign that said, "Things aren't always as they appear." Now I told the Lord, I said, "Lord, all I want is enough for gas money. That's all I want. Just give me enough for some gas money." And I tried to hold up the sign the next day, and I couldn't. My body wouldn't let me.
You know, you're hungry. Your kid is hungry.
I have been hungry.
Being hungry numerous of days, not having the funds to get my kids something to eat.
See, I will go without eating as long as I can feed her. But if I don't have the money to feed either of us,
your human nature would not allow you to continue to be hungry.
You have to do whatever you got to do.
How's a person supposed to survive?
When you have no
other options, when you don't have any money.
If they
You
can't
can't
find
get a job, period, then
they'll take the money.
They're gonna go out to the streets.
and that's what basically drives people to go to the streets and commit crimes.
Because they can't find a job.
You're in a desperate place. Your survival instincts just kick in. It's like you gotta live. You don't wanna die in the street.
It's fend or eat.
You don't
fend, you don't eat.
You see everything falling apart.
It's a dog-eat-dog world. You gotta remember that, because everybody's not at the top. So at the bottom, it's a fight. At the top, it might be luxury. In the middle, it might be a little luxurious. But at the bottom, it's a fight. And you can't lose. And it makes people become very confrontational. It makes people become very angry. It makes people become less communicative or less patient.
I live around a lot of violence. I live around a lot of drugs.
I mean, a lot of drugs. Drug addicts.
You know, I see a lot of people smoking crack, heroin.
Where everything around you is either graffiti, drugs, or violence.
It's really been kind of rough at the gang violence and
Really rough.
murders going on
Pretty
here.
rough. A lot of.
We got a lot of
shootings.
You hear a lot of
I hear a lot of
gun
gunshots,
shooting.
shootings every day.
We got drive-by shootings.
So many people are getting killed or hurt.
People constantly getting
Assaults,
shot, robbed, stabbed.
Vandalism.
I even seen people getting robbed.
Somebody
Someone
robbing
from
them
work.
when they come
Held a
home
gun
from
to my
work.
back when I was.
Of my social institution and team.
I don't want to hear all the.
You know what? I'm gonna stop. It's hard to watch work in progress in public. Okay, maybe we can turn on the lights and you have some questions, comments.
So please use the mic because we're streaming. That wasn't for me, it was for them. So I think you're. So. One, two. 1, 2. Okay, so Natalie, I would like to start with a very simple question. Basically, could you just talk a little bit about your process of working on these pieces? I mean that because you are basically dealing with huge databases. So how does it work out? I mean, how do you come up with all these combinations of bursts of sort of like words, and all that stuff? You know, how does it work?
Well, right now there's, with the digital humanities, there's all of these algorithms that people are using, right, to collect patterns of information, kind of to do what I'm doing, but I do it all by hand. And I know all the material. And I don't think I could do it any other way. So because a lot of it is that I kind of work out what it is that I think people are saying as I watch videos, and then I come up with another search term I need to find. This is with the previous, not with this new work, but, and so the only way, that's sort of, this is where, I mean, I am the algorithm in a way, because there's something about the, I mean, it's like a form of writing through the writing a story through the database. And there isn't anything really systematic about it.
But you have some kind of a way of classifying these things in folders and things like that, and it obviously in some cases must require repeated watching of the same clip, so to say, like to find the right elements and things like that, let's say in that mass ornament thing.
Searching is really a big part of it. I mean, I'll label and then search. And then I'll organize things by categories, and then I'll start to put that together after the categories. So I do make folders, and I name the clips. And when I'm working with texts, I edit through the text, I edit through the videos, and then I'll label them, I'll name them the phrase that somebody has said. And so I build up the narrative through the files. There's not a lot of delegating that I can do to somebody else, though, unfortunately. More so with mass ornament, because it was about cataloging gestures. But with the others, it's less, I can't really delegate. I wish I could.
My question is about the phenomenon you discussed about people in isolation saying the same thing. And my question is, when you were there, this other body in the room asking these guiding questions, do you think that phenomenon was tainted in any way?
I wouldn't call it tainted, but I would call it changed, yes. Yes, in the sense that, I mean, people are always responding to something, and in the other videos, they may have been responding to watching the same Beyonce video, or they may have been responding to watching the same news item. In the case of these videos, they're responding to a question that I ask. So yeah, it's always shaped by some outside form, in some way or another. That they all answer certain things the same. It's less apparent in the little clip that I showed you, but there's a section where I ask everybody to what they would say. I want them to speak directly to the camera and to address the middle class or the wealthy and say, what is it that you think they need to know about this situation? And a dozen people said that people needed to come to the neighborhood. And they looked right at the camera and they're like, come to the neighborhood. Just come on down, come on. Right? And they all say it. So like that, yeah, it's in a way it's a response to what I'm saying, but there's also something, I mean, I'm kind of collecting something that's in the air within different contexts, right? And then making that material.
So with the last group of people, what motivates them to speak to you? Are they being paid, or are they part of a program, or who are they?
I've been going around to different organizations that are serving people in poverty. So some people are getting meals, and some people are getting shelter. Some people are getting their GEDs, and I give a presentation about what I'm doing. And I ask people who want to participate, and I tell them that I'm making this project because I think that people need to hear from people who are struggling the most in this country because they don't get heard, that the stories are always about the middle class struggling, and I pay people $20 to make a video. People in general love doing it, because mostly people who I'm talking to don't get to tell their story. So that's been really, I mean, it's very addictive to do it, because it's like the stories are amazing. I find them really incredible, and people are such incredible performers. And I think just saying that I'm trying to make it for TV. Just like on YouTube, everyone wants to be in public. Everyone wants to be seen and heard. So I think that there's something very appealing. People sit in front of laptops and they see themselves performing. And I think that something happens when you're doing that. That's very different than if you're recording a conversation.
So just the following up on this your work in progress. So now, if we compare this with some of the early other pieces, for example, the dance, so the mass ornament thing, so where the stuff is something that happens for various motives there. So I'm just wondering, could you see it possible? I mean, that thinking about all the stuff that people put up online spontaneously, so to say, would you see any way of creating something similar to the one that you are doing now, just by using found footage, and if so how do you think it might differ in its message from this sort of like partly directed effort?
Most people who I talk to barely, I mean, they don't have cell phones, and if they do, they usually run out of money to keep the cell phones going. So they couldn't, they're not online. I couldn't find it online. That was what was so exciting when I first did the project, and I had other people collecting it for me, is that it was stories I really wasn't hearing. And I've been watching a lot of stories online, and they're just not there. And they're not in the media either, because the media is not covering, I mean, there's been studies by Fair and Accuracy about who's, sort of the numbers of stories about people living in deep poverty in this country. And although 33% of people in this country live in or near the poverty line, which is a questionable measure of poverty anyway, they're not really being heard. And so I think one of the things that this project is doing that's the complete opposite is it's not looking at abundance and filtering that abundance, but it's kind of starting from the point of scarcity and then building an archive out of that. So that's why it's the reverse. They're not online. I do want to make an archive online from this and somehow figure out a way to navigate through that with some kind of narrative. I think when you just put a database online, it just dies. So there has to be a way to dynamically navigate it. I don't know what that is right now, though. But how it would different is a good question. On YouTube and on social media, the point is brevity, right? You have to say it quickly, 10 minutes or less. And I'm talking to people for a long time, like for an hour. It's kind of a long time. And so people go in greater depth. And when I've been editing, I find just automatically that I need to stay with people longer. And I think of the editing in this piece as kind of like jazz, that there are solos, and then there are moments where there are choral kind of eruptions of like sort of people, I don't know if eruptions is the right word for jazz, but the soloists are longer. And I think that that's sort of necessary, partly because of what the material is. But I mean, the question for me is what it will look like in the end, and I have no idea right now. Right now, I'm just kind of collecting the archive and starting to look for the patterns in it.
Thank you. I should know that. I obviously like and appreciate what you're doing with this poverty piece, so far untitled. And I'm interested in the kind of aesthetic treatments and categories that you're bringing with you from the found footage. But I have to say that I find it actually much more classical and less compellingly contemporary than the found footage work, because I think it's precisely because you're building from scarcity that it fits with a tradition of documentary work that predates the cinema and even predates photography, you know, and that's what Studs Terkel does when he goes out to find stories of hard times in oral history, and oral historians have been doing this. But there's really something about the mass ornament piece and the Now He's Out work that, I mean, in mass ornament, I really get the sense that you've done something amazing, which is finding that you found all of the monkeys sitting with the typewriters, typing out Shakespeare, and they just happen to end up with Busby Berkeley. And I think that the kind of mix of the formal movements and then the kind of typologies across race and age, and the way that we pick out certain kinds of figures from this vast database. And I get the sense that for every dancer that we're looking at, there's like 1 million more people. And I'd also really like to see you here's the horrible critic thing where, hey artist, I'd love to see you do something, right? Which everybody hates, but I'll do it anyway, which is, your opening slide was really interesting because it's a guy holding up a camera with his finger visible and also reflected back at us. And it's that mirrored shot that is so popular for this as a way to represent the body, because you talk about embodiment and the mirror becomes central to that. It's amazing how people won't use a tripod, but they'll use a mirror. And that, you know, especially when you get into the realm of sexting and all of those kinds of images, that, you know, this is a really new way of representing the self on a general level. And I just feel like Erica's original question about how do you actually do this? How do you find this? How do you create these typologies? It's very different than our kind of classical vision of the editor in front of, you know, a rack. And I'm thinking about, you know, the classic sequence from Men with a Movie Camera, where Allah has all of these, the wife of Ziga Vertov has all of these typed film reels, the canisters. But I mean, this is going so far beyond. And I haven't created much of a question yet. But what I'd like to say is, are you planning to return to that? It's just, I appreciate what you're doing and how you're taking those aesthetics with you, but I just think that that other work is so fertile.
No, I'm struggling with those questions too. Yes, I was going to do something with Trayvon Martin. I had started a project actually, but then I ended up having to do this, and I haven't figured out like completely what the relationship of the form to the content is with this one in the way that I have with the others, and I think it's like there's something I think there's something different that I'll have to do with the form. The way that it's different, the way that I would argue that it's different than Studs Terkel, who of course is important as a legacy, as is the farm security workers documents, and a whole host of other documentary archive builders of the past, is that in conventional documentary you have in character-driven documentary you have 4 characters who are composites, right? And we don't know they're composites, but they're standing in for whole groups of people. And I want to make a documentary where I'm making visible those composites, because instead of having 4 people, you have 400 people. And to kind of, you know, through the editing and through the form, to kind of tell a life story, but not following those 4 people. That's really the challenge for me, whether I can do that. Right now it looks too much like my other work because I'm editing, and that's sort of how I can edit it on a screen. And so I think like what it has to do, right now what it has to do with the social media part of it is that, is the mirror, that people are looking at themselves in the mirror and speaking differently because of that. And they're also they're not imagining everyone and no one, they're imagining I'm talking to the powerful and the middle class and the wealthy. So their imagination of who they speak to is very different. But I do agree that it's so different, and there is something really, really timely about the other one. This is more timely in a kind of social condition way, but how that fits with the forum, I haven't worked out completely. I have an idea, but I haven't quite completely worked it out, and I'm as worried about it as you are. So, but I think I'll be able to figure it out. I'm just not sure yet. And I haven't given up the other one because I want to keep making the installations because I think that they're really, I have a lot more I want to do with them. Maybe I won't in a few years when I come back to it because things will have changed, though.
So just a quick idea, I suppose. Couldn't you post your questions online and then get video responses that way?
Yeah, I could do that.
Is that something that...
I could do that, and I've thought about that before, but I think that online, I'm so interested in what's already there without me intervening. It sort of goes back to your question again, which is that, sort of it changes it when you're there. Like that's where the documentary comes in, that I'm looking for what's already there. And people I did a piece for, that I didn't show you in the Lockman installation, where people are talking about losing their job. And everyone is telling the same story in the exact same way about losing their job. So I started to think about, sort of how people are talking about struggle and the economy. But it's a different crowd.
Yeah. No, I said that because it seems like, at least from my observation, the first few pieces you showed kind of dealt with like a global surface.
Mm-hmm.
It showed this repetition of thought and of action across in a global context. And then this final what you showed seemed to be more about trying to get into depth and trying to get into meaning and depth at a deeper level than what you could find online. So it's kind of navigating that, coming up with a solution to navigate that seems difficult.
Yeah, it's different too, because it's like there is something common about people talking about the ghetto. They're talking about the ghetto in very similar ways in Oakland or in Los Angeles and in Detroit. There's common experience that can still be talked about and that's still shared the way it is online. It's just that it's not online.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. So the framing of your pictures of each video, do you use them to help tell your story, or do you use them more as a purely aesthetic thing, like what the kind of randomization of each frame?
In the last piece?
Yeah.
And where the frame is in the big black space? Good question. I haven't worked it out yet. Right now it's almost random. Because I'm not sure. One of the challenges, it's different to make an installation where you have black, but if you're making a film where there's a lot of black, one way that I'm thinking about that black space is, I guess I think about the reason I haven't connected the videos together is that people are really alone. Like there's a metaphor of, sort of the isolation, that they're sharing common experience, but it's also like their experience is really isolating them. So that's partly how I'm thinking about the black, but I haven't really thought about, I don't have a system yet for how, and if there, or I don't know yet if that matters, like where things are in the frame, or if it works to have such small pictures. The reason I have them small is because I wanted to be true to the form. The form is, I'm making very small QuickTime movies. They're like postage stamps. So I wanted to kind of represent that in scale. And that also goes back to what I'm thinking about this idea of producing a composite character. So not to have anybody be a star, but to have everybody a kind of similar scale.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question that goes back to the mass ornament. So obviously the Tiller girls are not dancing on YouTube, but many of the Busby Berkeley sequences and Ziegfeld Follies, that kind of things are there. And they already influenced generations of music video makers and advertising filmmakers and things, so they are very much part of a certain kind of a sort of like iconography of dance. So I'm just wondering about the just a slightly different variation of that topic. So did you think about, so in that piece, you use sort of like these isolated acts in people's places, and then you sort of like construct your own sort of like version of that sort of like idea about the mass ornament in this piece. But there are also many videos of group dancing, so people doing the same thing together in a space, and I'm just wondering that some of those choreographies, obviously there's a million ones influenced by Thriller, but obviously some of them may go back even to that iconographical influence leading back to the sort of like the Hollywood musical, that kind of thing. So I was just wondering that when you were sort of like researching that piece, were you ever thinking about this other aspect of the mass ornament? So in a more literal sense, going back to these sort of like group acts existing in that space and performed by this whoever people.
I'm not sure if I can answer that, but I do think that in the videos that people are making themselves, they're influenced by all of that. I mean, they're reperforming like a whole history of dance in their videos. Sometimes they're doing something that's very contemporary for 2009, right? That was before the recent phenomenon, right? With what's it called again? The one that's, but, right? But I mean, like but I think that like each one, they all have that chronology. I mean, they all have that in their head, and that's why. I mean, it's easy enough to find somebody lifting their arm and then to put it together and say that they're all thinking of the same move. But then, I mean, I don't know if any of you remember I'm a Single Lady, that everyone was dancing that, but there's a whole sequence where like we've got lots and lots of people who are performing that. A couple of years ago, everybody, when I showed the piece, knew that. Right now, less people know that. So I don't know if that precisely answers your question. I kind of wanted to go back to the 30s. I wanted to go to the 30s because that was, because there was a lot of conversation about the 30s and 2009 with the recession. And I was thinking about Fordism and post-Fordism, and so that I kind of that's where I wanted to go.
So I just briefly replied, so that my question was simply motivated by the sort of like, these topos ideas that I'm developing. So how these longer term sort of like iconographical motives are being recycled right there. So because there's sort of like in a way this reference point in your piece also went back way beyond the internet to the 1920s and 30s, to that era that none of these people doing these acts on those videos ever experienced personally. So but that was basically like transmitted through these media channels as so like a spiral like motion and movement and things like that. So I'm just kind of like really curious myself about how that longer term sort of like iconographical world gets translated into the world of these videos and starts living its own life, and so I guess that is just a sort of like alternative way of looking at this idea about the mass ornaments, how that sort of like gets sort of like embedded in that environment, so to say.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you've obviously been working with YouTube as an archive for, well, it hasn't been around that long, but a number of years. And I'm just wondering if your experience of it has changed over time, because as it's changed, obviously it's expanding, but also, those images that we originally associated with, extremely small resolutions have also been growing, and I wonder if that's affected either what you get or how you search or just your general experience of YouTube as an archive?
Yeah, it's not an archive, right? It's a database, right? It's because the logic to it is made up by the guys who are making up the algorithms as they go, and they're hidden to us. So it's a hard source because it is constantly changing and it could be gone in any minute and turned into something else. I haven't used it in a couple of years because the last piece that I did was using the archive. Well, That's not true. I haven't used it for about a year, 6 months. And because it's commercial, like it's unstable. Like it does what it wants. It does what the corporation wants it to do. So it's sometimes when I use it, when I come up with an idea and I'm like, I have to download as much as I can quickly before it disappears, because it's so unstable and because it's not a public domain. And who knows what it will be in a year or two. The quality has certainly gotten higher. When I started, I did a piece in 2008 where it was actually kind of prelude to Mass Ornament called Parking Lot, which was documenting people kind of using public spaces like parking lots and doing all sorts of things in the parking lot. And when I look at that video now, the quality is so, the resolution on the videos that I downloaded is so low. So yeah, it certainly has changed.
I have one question. So with Mass Ornament, it seemed like you were focused on like exhibitionism and that sort of thing. Have you ever considered like sourcing your footage from more like, I guess, exhibitionist like sites that involve like camming and that sort of thing, like where it's not necessarily to like the entire world, sometimes it's like to a certain like room, or it's like one-to-one, like chat roulette or something like that. Have you ever looked, or are you interested in that as like a source for your work?
I am, but I think someone else should do it. There's so much, but yeah, I am interested in that. I mean, I'm interested in the different ways that people are representing themselves, but it's sort of like, the possibilities are really endless. Like I was interested in, I was thinking about doing something with porn for a while, but I kind of got sidetracked. You should do it.
I'm working on it.
He's researching.
Yeah.
I think let's leave it with that, and thanks.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.